I never thought much about the way people share food until that Saturday afternoon at Mason's backyard barbecue, when Reed casually fed me a piece of grilled pineapple from his plate, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I can still feel the way my breath caught in my throat, the way my entire body went still except for my heart, which decided to perform an entire percussion solo against my ribcage. That moment, that simple gesture, cracked something open inside me that I'd been carefully keeping sealed for years. Mason had been planning this barbecue for weeks, inviting everyone from our graduate program. I almost didn't go, honestly. I'd been using the excuse of dissertation work to avoid social gatherings, but Mason guilt-tripped me with that particular brand of friendship manipulation that only works because you actually care about the person. So there I was, standing in his backyard on a perfect June afternoon, holding a beer I wasn't really drinking, watching smoke curl up from the grill and trying to look like I belonged in a crowd of people having fun. That's when Reed showed up. I'd known him for about 8 months at that point, ever since he'd transferred into our program from another university. We'd been in 2 seminars together, had grabbed coffee a handful of times to discuss assignments, exchanged probably 1,000 text messages about everything from academic theory to terrible reality television. He was one of those people who made friendship feel effortless, who remembered details about conversations from weeks ago, who sent you memes at 2 in the morning because he thought they'd make you laugh. And they always did. But I'd been so careful with him. So incredibly careful. Because somewhere around the 3rd or 4th time we'd stayed up until dawn talking in the library, I'd realized I was developing feelings that went way beyond friendship. And that terrified me. I'd spent most of my 20s convinced I had this part of myself figured out, that I was straight, that the occasional thought about a guy was just aesthetic appreciation, or whatever rationalization I could construct. Reed made all those carefully built rationalizations crumble like sandcastles at high tide. He walked into Mason's backyard wearing this faded blue t-shirt and jeans, his dark hair a little messy, like he'd just woken up from a nap. And he smiled when he saw me. Not just a polite smile, but this genuine, warm expression that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He navigated through the crowd of people straight to me, like I was the person he'd been looking for. "Hey, stranger," he said, bumping his shoulder against mine in that casual way that friends do, except my entire arm felt like it had been touched by electricity. "Thought you might bail on this?" "I almost did," I admitted. "Dissertation guilt is real." He laughed. And God, I loved his laugh. It was this full, unguarded sound that made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny. Well, I'm glad you didn't. These things are always better when you're here. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled and took a sip of my beer, trying to ignore the way my pulse had picked up. We fell into easy conversation, the way we always did, talking about a paper he was working on, a terrible documentary I'd watched, the ongoing drama in our department that everyone pretended not to care about, but absolutely did. Being around Reed always felt like coming home, like I could finally exhale after holding my breath all day. Mason started pulling food off the grill, and everyone began loading up plates with burgers and hot dogs and grilled vegetables. Reed and I ended up in line together, and I watched as he piled his plate with an absurd amount of food, including these grilled pineapple slices that Mason had prepared as some kind of experimental side dish. "You have to try the pineapple," Reed said, adding 3 pieces to his plate. "Mason's been bragging about his marinade all week." I made a face. Grilled fruit seems wrong somehow. "That's because you have no sense of culinary adventure," he teased. "Trust me on this." We found a spot on the edge of Mason's deck, sitting on the steps that led down to the yard, our shoulders almost touching. The party continued around us, people laughing and talking, music playing from someone's Bluetooth speaker. But it all felt distant, like background noise to the conversation between us. Reed started eating, and I focused on my burger, trying not to be too aware of how close we were sitting, how I could smell his cologne mixed with the charcoal smoke from the grill, how every time he shifted his weight, our arms would brush, and I'd feel that contact like a brand. Then he picked up a piece of the grilled pineapple with his fork, turned to me, and without any preamble, held it up to my mouth. "Try this," he said, and there was something in his voice, something soft and certain, that made it impossible to refuse. I should have made a joke. I should have taken the fork from him. I should have done anything other than what I did, which was part my lips and let him feed me that piece of pineapple. His eyes on my mouth, his hand steady and sure. The pineapple was sweet and smoky and caramelized, but I barely tasted it. All I could focus on was the intimacy of the gesture, the way he was looking at me, the way the rest of the world seemed to fade into nothing. Time did this weird thing where it both stopped and sped up simultaneously. "Good, right?" he asked, his voice quieter than before, and he hadn't pulled his hand back yet. The fork was still there, hovering between us, and his eyes had moved from my mouth to meet my gaze directly. "Yeah," I managed to say, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Really good." He smiled, and there was something different in that smile, something I couldn't quite name but felt in every nerve ending. Then he went back to his own plate, like nothing monumental had just happened, like he hadn't just completely rewired my understanding of our friendship. I sat there, my heart racing, my mind spiraling through a dozen different thoughts at once. Did that mean something? Was I reading too much into it? Do friends do that? I'd seen friends share food before, obviously. But this felt different. The way he'd looked at me, the softness in his voice, the deliberate intimacy of the gesture. Or maybe I was projecting, seeing what I wanted to see, because I'd been harboring these feelings for months. We kept talking, but I was only half present, the other half of me still stuck in that moment, replaying it over and over. Reed seemed completely normal, telling a story about his roommate's disastrous attempt at home brewing, laughing at something Mason yelled from across the yard. But every so often, I'd catch him glancing at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, like he was trying to figure something out. As the afternoon stretched into evening, people started migrating inside to escape the mosquitoes. Reed and I stayed on the deck steps, and the conversation shifted into deeper territory the way it always did with us. We talked about our families, our fears about finishing our degrees, what we wanted our lives to look like in 5 years. He told me about growing up in a small town where he never quite fit in. And I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about, like how I'd always felt like I was performing a version of myself rather than actually being myself. "That must be exhausting," he said softly. And there was such genuine empathy in his voice that I felt something crack in my chest. "It is," I admitted. "I don't really do it around you, though. I don't know why." He was quiet for a moment, and when I looked over at him, he was staring out at the darkening yard, his profile illuminated by the string lights Mason had hung around the deck. "Maybe because I don't need you to be anyone other than who you are," he finally said. "I like who you are." The words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning I was afraid to examine too closely. I wanted to say something back, something equally honest and vulnerable, but fear locked the words in my throat. What if I was misreading everything? What if I said something that ruined this friendship that had become so important to me? The party wound down around 11, people filtering out in groups, calling goodbyes and making plans for the following week. Reed and I helped Mason clean up, carrying plates inside and shoving leftover food into his overcrowded refrigerator. Mason, who was slightly drunk and very happy, kept thanking us and trying to send us home with food. "Take the pineapple," Mason insisted, shoving a container at Reed. You guys seem to really enjoy it. Reed caught my eye and smiled, and there was something conspiratorial in that smile. Something that made my stomach flip. We did, didn't we? We left together, walking toward the street where we'd both parked. The night was warm and clear, and the neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant sound of someone's television through an open window. We walked slowly, neither of us in a hurry to reach our cars and end the evening. When we got to his car, which was parked a few spots ahead of mine, Reed turned to face me, leaning back against the driver's side door. I had a good time tonight, he said. Me too, I replied, and meant it despite the emotional chaos of the last several hours. He was quiet for a moment, and in the streetlight I could see him worrying his bottom lip, like he was trying to decide whether to say something. Finally, he took a breath and spoke. Can I ask you something? And you can totally tell me to mind my own business if I'm out of line. My heart started racing again. Sure. That thing you said earlier, about performing a version of yourself. He paused, his eyes searching my face. Is there a version of yourself you don't let people see? I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. This was it, the moment where I could be honest or I could deflect, and the choice felt enormous. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but openness and care in his expression. No judgment, no expectation, just genuine curiosity and concern. Yeah, I said quietly. There is. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Do you think you could let me see that version? The question was so gentle, so carefully phrased, giving me all the power to say no, to maintain my walls. But standing there in the quiet street, with Reed looking at me like I was someone worth knowing fully, I felt those walls start to crumble. I'm not sure I know how, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure I even fully know who that is yet. That's okay, he said, and then he did something that stopped my breath entirely. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. We can figure it out together. If you want. I stared at our joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing these small, gentle circles on my skin, and felt tears prick at my eyes. When I looked up at him, I saw my own vulnerability reflected back at me, and I realized he was taking just as big a risk as I was. I want that, I said, and saying the words out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I really want that. He smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Good, he said simply, because I've been hoping you'd say that for about 3 months now. Wait, what? My brain struggled to process this information. 3 months. He laughed softly. That night we stayed in the library until dawn working on our seminar papers, and you fell asleep on my shoulder in the reading room, and I realized I was completely gone for you. I've been trying to figure out if you might feel the same way ever since. I did fall asleep on your shoulder, I remembered, the memory suddenly taking on new significance. You didn't move for like an hour. My arm went completely numb, he said, grinning. Didn't care. You looked peaceful. I started laughing, and once I started, I couldn't stop. All the tension of the evening releasing in waves of slightly hysterical laughter. He started laughing too, and we stood there in the street, holding hands and laughing like idiots, and it felt perfect. When we finally calmed down, he squeezed my hand gently. So what now? I thought about it, about all the fear and confusion and careful denial I'd been carrying around, and realized I was tired of it. I was tired of not being honest with myself, tired of hiding, and standing there with Reed, who somehow made everything feel possible. I knew what I wanted. "Now we figure it out," I said. "Together." He smiled again, that warm, genuine smile that had drawn me to him from the beginning. I'd like that. We stood there for another few minutes, neither of us wanting to let go, making plans to get coffee the next day, to actually talk about what this meant, what we wanted. When we finally said goodnight, and I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there until it was gone. Driving home, I kept thinking about that moment at the barbecue, the way Reed had fed me that piece of pineapple like it was nothing, like it was everything. Such a simple gesture, but it had been an invitation, a question asked without words, and somehow, without even fully understanding what I was doing, I'd answered yes. That night, lying in bed and replaying the entire evening in my mind, I realized that falling in love with Reed hadn't been a single moment or decision. It had been 1,000 small moments, a gradual recognition of something that had probably been true for longer than I wanted to admit. But that moment at the barbecue, that intimate gesture of sharing food, of literally nourishing each other, that was the moment I stopped being able to deny it. That was the moment everything changed. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, and I picked it up to see a text from Reed. "Thank you for tonight. For being honest. For taking a chance on this. On us." I smiled in the darkness and typed back, "Thank you for seeing me. The real me. Even when I was trying to hide." His response came quickly. "I always saw you. I was just waiting for you to see yourself." I read those words over and over, feeling something settle in my chest. Something that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what I was feeling. I wasn't trying to rationalize it away or convince myself it was something else. I was just letting myself feel it, fully and completely. The next morning, we met for coffee at our usual place, a little cafe near campus that served terrible coffee, but had good pastries and comfortable chairs. When I walked in, Reed was already there, sitting at our usual table by the window, and when he saw me, he smiled in a way that made my entire body warm. We talked for 3 hours, about everything and nothing, about what we wanted and what scared us, about the fact that neither of us had really dated men before, but that didn't make this any less real. We talked about taking things slow, about being patient with ourselves and each other as we figured out what this relationship looked like. And the whole time, I felt this sense of rightness, like all the pieces of myself were finally aligning. At some point, Reed reached across the table and took my hand again, and I marveled at how natural it felt, how right. "This is real, right?" I asked, needing the confirmation. "I'm not imagining this." He squeezed my hand gently. "It's real. We're real." And we were. That afternoon at Mason's barbecue, when Reed fed me grilled pineapple from his plate like it was nothing, like it was everything. He'd opened a door I hadn't even known I was standing in front of. He'd shown me that intimacy could be gentle and certain, that love could be patient and kind, that I could be fully myself and be loved for it, not despite it. Looking back now, months later, I can see that moment for what it was. Not just the beginning of a relationship, but the beginning of me finally being honest with myself. Reed didn't change who I was. He just helped me see who I'd always been, underneath all the performance and denial. He fed me from his plate. And in doing so, he nourished something in me that had been starving for years. The part of me that just wanted to be seen and accepted and loved exactly as I was. And that made all the difference.